Hello everyone, welcome to another LinkedIn Live session with Project Control Academy. I am Shorya Gurbani, the founder and technical director of Project Control Academy, and today I'm very excited about the topic that we have decided for you for today's session. It's on a new smart project delivery solution. It's called Focus to Finish methodology, which has been working great on some of the big projects and on accelerating the projects and finishing on time. So it's going to be a fantastic discussion that we are going to have. We are going to also have some visuals and PowerPoint presentations, unlike other casual LinkedIn Live sessions that you have been on. So if you are here, just sit back, relax, and enjoy this session. And don't forget to ask your questions, because it's going to be, I'm assuming that many of you have not been exposed to this Focus to Finish methodology. Is it something new? Please chat on the chat box down below and let us know if this is something that you are hearing for the first time or you know what it is. So just share your opinion about this topic that we are going to discuss today. Also, don't forget to introduce yourself, who you are, from which country you are tuning in, and what you are looking forward to learn from today's session. But to give you an overall view of today and what we are covering, our main focus of today's session is going to be on this new smart project delivery technique, Focus to Finish delivery methodology. And what it is, we will go over a case study and how it has been implemented on a real project and how you can implement something similar to accelerate your project delivery and finishing on time and hopefully on budget too. So you're going to kind of get introduced to some new technologies that I'm very excited about. And every time we had exposure to realization technologies and the fantastic tool and solution that they offer, we had a lot of great questions and engagements. So hopefully you found a lot of value out of today's session. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce my fantastic guest speakers today, Dr. Basu from Realization Technology. He's tuning in from India, and he is going to share one big case study that they have done and open up more about this Focus to Finish methodology. So I would like Dr. Basu to introduce himself, and then we get started. So Dr. Basu, welcome on board. We are so happy to have you here on this LinkedIn Live session. Would you mind telling us a bit more about yourself? I know you've been with Realization for such a long time, but give us more insight about yourself and your experience, and also then share a little bit about this Focus to Finish methodology, what that is all about. Is it a term that's made up, or that's really something that's working?
Yeah, okay. So, hello, thanks for having me here. My name is Saurav. I have been working with Realization for the last 12 years. I did my doctorate in operations research and joined Realization, and I've been working since 2009. So this methodology that we have come up with, it's an alternate way of looking at projects and an alternate way of delivering projects. All over the world, when you talk to people, answer is it's due to factors that are out of our control, and that's why I thought to use a case study that of a project that faced huge delays due to completely uncontrollable factors, and still by using this methodology, how we could help our customer achieve record timelines, and hope to give an insight to how this works and why it is more controllable when real world problems come.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for the introduction, Dr. Basu. So can you tell us why you call this Focus to Finish methodology? Is it something that you focus on implementation and finish that no matter if you're late or not? You just share more insight about the methodology, and then I know you have a great case study to share. Then we go through the depth of the case study. I appreciate if you just share more insight about this fantastic methodology we are about to share.
Yeah, you sort of described it. Basically, we don't bother about start dates and end dates for different activities in a project. Any large project has thousands of details. So we do not look at the start dates, end dates. We just take up a batch of work, and we try to do it as fast as possible. So the focus is on finishing the batch of work and not on starting something else. So that is why the name
That's
focus and finish.
amazing. And it's applicable to any type of project, small or large, right?
Yeah, it is a project. It sort of is domain agnostic, so you can apply it to any project. And basically
Fantastic.
the is that projects have some inherent complexities, especially in terms of capacities and in terms of factors that are out of our control. And the more volatile the environment is, the stronger this method becomes.
That's great. That's the first time I'm hearing this. I don't know about our audience. Is it the first time you're hearing about the focus to finish methodology? If this is, just type in the chat. So I see for me, it's the first time. So I'm very excited to learn from you, Dr. Basu, and see how you have implemented this fantastic methodology on a big, large project. So, but before we get there and going through the case study, I just want to have some greetings to the people who are here joining us. Hello, Mehdi, Kermat, Hani from Egypt, Majid, Masoud, Kermat from California, Sultan, very good to see you here. So Mohammed, so very good. That's great to have you here. So if you have any question as we are presenting, please have them coming so we will cover your question throughout or at the end of the session. So let's get started. Dr. Basu, would you mind sharing how this process, focus to finish methodology has been work for a project you've been on, which as you said has been quite delayed, and you could really create some kind of achieved a great success with that. So would you mind sharing more details about the case study and how we can implement something similar on our projects?
Sure. So I'll start with the case study. I'll share my screen, and if you have any follow-up questions on the methodology, I'll go deeper into it. So the project I'm going to discuss is a shipyard project, and the reason why. So obviously, it was if you look at the value, it's pretty big, and projects of this size, there's a huge scope which has to be executed. Now, in this particular project, there was out of the entire scope, there was one very crucial piece, which is called a ship lift. So, if you think of shipyards, they make ships and they repair ships. These are the two primary businesses that they have. And in both cases, finally, the ship has to, if it's repaired, then the ship has to come in from the sea and it has to be worked upon. If it is building a new ship, then it has to be built and then it has to be lowered into the water. And typically all over the world, dry docks are something that are used. So dry docks are nothing but very big spaces where a ship can float in, and then you can just close the gate, pump the water out, and people can work on the ship. That is the most commonly used facility to repair and to launch ships. But the problem with the dry dock is that it sort of limits the capacity of the shipyard, which means once we are inside the dock, then other ships have to wait for that dock to be empty again. In this case, Shiplift is something that a company called Syncrolift, they almost have a monopoly on it. And what it does, it's nothing. It's as the name suggests, it's a lift. It's a huge platform. So the ship sort of floats over the platform. The platform is underwater, and then the platform rises and it brings the ship at the level of the ground. And there is something called the transfer system which goes under the ship, and it lifts the ship and gets it inside. So this on land you can create multiple facilities. So having a ship lift increases the capacity of the shipyard, and that is why it's very crucial. So out of the entire scope which was there, the ship lift was the most crucial piece, because for a new shipyard which is coming up, if you don't have a way to launch a ship or to take a ship inside, then you won't get any business. So there was a lot of scope in this, and you can see there were a lot of production and repair shops as well. but some delays there could be managed. But if the ship lift is not ready, you won't get a single order. So that's why it was sort of the most crucial piece of the project. In addition, this was being built in India for the first time. So the company was attempting to build it on its own, going against the tide and not taking it from the company which has the monopoly across the world. So they were doing it for the first time, and they were targeting a time which is the best in the world. It was taking something as a benchmark, a shiplet which was 25% smaller than what they were going to build. So it was a very aggressive target. And if you look at the amount of loss, so apart from the revenues that would be lost, just the pure cost of interest was very high. And as I explained, if you look at the challenges faced, if you look at the factors which disrupted the execution time and again, there was 9 months lost in supplies, because in one case, a ship was bringing plates which were very critical for the project, and it sort of had a breakdown in the sea. The owner declared bankruptcy, and it was floating in the sea. And litigation happened, and there was 5 months or more lost in that. And then a very crucial piece of the supply was missed. That added another 4 months. During the course of the project, there was a ban on sand. So in construction, if sand is not there, work stops. So they had to create a plant where they would crush rocks and generate sand. Being on the coast, it was exposed to the weather and cyclones. A lot of piling work has to happen, and the depth of the piles is pretty, it was around 50 meters. And around 35 meters, at around 35 meters, unexpectedly very hard rock strata was found, and it made the job very difficult. And so on and so forth. So whatever could go wrong in a project of this magnitude, everything happened in this project. So this is how this is sort was a picture taken during the course of the project, and I'll try to use this to illustrate the size of the project and the different components that it had. And I'm going to focus mostly on the ship lift part of the entire shipyard to keep the discussion simple. So if my screen is visible, I hope you can see that there's a sea, and you can see that there are two piers which are running deep into the sea. So this is basically a lot of civil works which involves piling inside the sea, and this piers would extend up to 200 meters. And if you see the gap between the piers, that's where the platform is supposed to go in, the ship lift is supposed to go in, and it's supposed to go down into the water. And when the ship floats in, it's supposed to bring it up, and then a transfer system would bring it inland. And that's why these rails are there. And so this entire ship lift consists primarily of the platform, and towards this side of the picture, you can see the platform getting fabricated. So this is a piece of the platform getting fabricated. So the entire platform was supposed to be created in 16 pieces. And if you look at, if you try to understand the size of the platform, this is a bus standing here. And so this is how big one of the pieces is. And there would be 16 more pieces like this, and all of it would go there. Okay. And so these are the two pieces of the project. This was being done by one contractor. This was being done by another contractor. Apart from these two, to pull the platform up and lower it down into the water, we would require 60 hoists. So hoists are something which you see in elevators, which has wires, and there would be 60 of them, which would hold the platform, the 16 pieces together, and they would lower and lift them in a very synchronized fashion, because the weight distribution of a ship is not very uniform. So the hoist would be exerting different forces, and just to keep the ship steady. And the fourth piece was the transfer system. So once the hoists have lifted the ship, then there's a transfer system which travels over these rails, go under the ship, lift the ship up, and then travel back to the place where the ship has to be worked upon. If it's a new ship being built, then it lifts and takes it on top of the platform, and then it comes back. So these were the four main components. All were being done by different contractors and were happening in different places in the project. So this is a sort of a brief description just to give you an idea what the project is. Let's now go into the results. So this was the testimonial of the customer. So we, in spite of all the delays, we ended up being 4 months late against the ambitious goal, but the overall timeline of 28 months was still a record. So the question is, how did we do it? So I'll start with what we had, what we saw when we went inside. And as I said, there are four major components. One is the civil works, which you saw, the piers which are going deep into the sea. Then the second part was creating the platform, which is also 200 meters long. Then creating those 60 hoists, which are going to lift the platform. And finally, the transfer system, which is going to go over the rails, go under the ship, and then bring it inside. So there was no, this picture is an sort of something that we created. There was no such picture. Typically, like in projects, there was a plan at a level 1 level, which is basically the desired milestone dates, which were communicated to different parties. So there are primarily 4 different contractors who were working on this in different locations. So the dates were communicated to them. They had their own schedules, and which ran into, if you take a total of them, it would run into something like 40,000 lines. And if you could put them all together, then it would look something like this. And I will try to explain quickly what it meant. It meant that we would create the piers from the land into the sea. And once there was enough space for one of the pieces of the platform to be lowered, that piece would get lowered. The moment it got lowered, the hoists which belong to that piece would get installed. And this way, all 16 pieces would get installed and commissioned. In parallel, the transfer system would get manufactured. It would have to get commissioned by itself in a different location. And then it would be sent to site, and the final commissioning of the entire ship lift would happen. Now, this we felt was a very risky plan to execute. The reason being that one piece, so these are technical dependencies. One piece of the civil works is done. It provides the work front for one piece of the platform. That provides a work front for a few of the hoists. And this is how the erection has to happen. Any delay anywhere, because we all know projects are exposed to external problems, and any delay anywhere would delay the entire sequence. So if shiplift civil works is delayed by a week, that means everything gets delayed by a week. If civil works is on time but platform is delayed by a week, it means the rest of it gets delayed by a week. And same with hoists. And if we are in for trouble and there are delays all over the place, then we don't even know what will happen to the project. So we changed this strategy and we created something like this. And as you can see, a lot of the parallel working, we have sort of made them sequential. And that, so what changed? So as you can see, if I come back again, you can see we reduced the duration of shiplift civil works. And that happened by introducing marine piling, which basically means instead of only moving from land, there was a jackup rig which was brought in from the sea, which would start moving in the opposite direction and cut down the overall time into half. And once the entire, so we are saying, don't hand over work fronts in bits and pieces, do the entire thing and hand over the entire work front for platform erection. So what that will allow us to do is, instead of doing one piece of the platform and doing it 16 times, we can assemble the entire platform in one go and lower it in one go. Similarly, once the entire platform is lowered, we can hand over the work front to hoists, and instead of doing 3-4 hoists at a time, we can do all 60 hoists together. So that way we can cut down the cycle times of each and make the plan a lot less risky. and there are this FBs or green bars which have appeared. This we call feeding buffers. A lot of people sort of confuse them with the floats or slacks which are there in traditional project management, but there is a big difference there. A float or a slack appears by chance. If you have a network, you run it, you will get some floats and slacks. These feeding buffers are deliberately put in place to make sure that there is only one critical path in the project. The remaining things are non-critical. So even if we suffer some delays in the other places, it would not hit my project. So that's the purpose of putting the feeding buffers in place. So, so if you look at this entire picture, these were the more or less the actions taken to make sure the plan would look like this, instead of what I showed you is a much more risky venture that was there before. And we call this a focus and finish strategy, because in each case we are going to be worried in execution about finishing the job in this much time and not trying to start the next block in parallel. So we are reducing parallel working to make it more stage wise, deliberated. Right? That sort of can be done faster. Then the intuition is we need to take more things in parallel. So we are deliberately going away from it. So so this is the strategy. And the obviously, if you look at it, it's a huge project. I am just showing a few blocks here. And inside each of these blocks, there's a lot of work, a lot of scope inside. But it's a deliberate strategy to manage the project at this level, not go deeper into it in terms of managing the project. So it does not mean we are ignoring the details. All we are saying from the perspective of managing the outcome of the project, this is the picture that I will try to defend during the course of the next 28 months. And what that means is that on a day-to-day level, there will be a lot of problems at the levels below. But if those problems are not affecting this bar, then we don't need to worry about it. So out of 100 things that go wrong on a daily basis, 98% of those things would not affect the size of the bar, and we don't need to solve those problems. They will happen, and people will solve it at their levels, and that's fine. But the couple of things that will going to hit this bar, those are the ones where top management or senior management has to really quickly solve. So this is the approach, that we look at the bars, the work happens below. If the disturbances are affecting this bar, management has to swing in and quickly close those and make sure, as I said, focus and finish, that we achieve this duration. We are not worried about starting what is coming up next. We are more focused on achieving what is there right in front of us. Now I'll try to quickly show you what happened during the course of the project, how all those uncertainties hit us, and how we were able to, just looking at this, how we were able to manage the plan. So the first thing that happened was, as you saw before, right into the starting of the project, we hit hard rock strata. So the work which civil works entailed was there were around 600 piles to be driven for each pier. So you saw 2 piers in the picture. For each pier, there were approximately 600 piles to be driven inside the sea. And what I explained was the way to move was, there's a rig on land which drives a row of piles. Once they're driven, then the rig is moved forward on top of the piles, and it drives the next row. And this is the way it moves. So it sort of moves in the snail space, one row at a time. And the average cycle time planned was around 7 days. So the moment it started hitting this hard rock strata, that 7 days jumped to around 12 days. So that's 5 days longer. And we use a system which immediately started projecting that the ship lift is going to get delayed by about a year. So this is slightly different. The system projection is slightly different from traditional way of expressing delays. Because if you think of it, when we drove the first 3 rows of the piles, instead of 7 days, it was taking 15 days. If we try to calculate delays, it would seem that in the first 3 weeks, the delay is only 10 days. But and that is because we are looking at what has already happened. But if we change the perception and we look at the balance work, then what we see is if every set of piles instead of 7 days is taking 12 days, that's 5 days longer per row. And if we have to do 100 more rows, which means we are looking at something which is 500 days longer than what we had originally planned. And this is a bit tricky because this is a very rude picture, a very a rude shock to the management. They would rather prefer to see a 10-day delay and think that we would recover very easily than looking at something which is projecting a year's delay. So that is the root shock, and that is why this method is a top-driven approach, where you cannot be sentimental about delays. You cannot be defensive about delays. You have to take the delays because the earlier you can get to see them, the earlier you can act. And it works the other way around. So what thankfully the management was supportive of this, and when they saw this big delay very early into the project, they were quickly able to take a lot of actions. And what were the actions? One was, as I said, we were also driving piles from the seaside, and that was faster. So that scope was quickly increased. Immediately, the management asked for improved piling rigs to be mobilized, and they would still take 3 months to mobilize them. So in the meantime, they wanted to do a quick time study to see how the current process could be improved. So all these three things happened pretty early in the project, even though technically the delay would be just 10 to 15 days. But the management swung into action. So that was very quick action. And so this projection also works the other way, which means the moment the time study, the improvement from the time study happened, and instead of 12 days, the rate came down to 10 days per row, immediately the system again showed a huge improvement on what was happening. So it gives you confirmation that when you look at the future and you're projecting the delay on the future, then it also gives you very quick confirmation of the improvements that are coming in. So this was the first set of actions and the first uncertainty which struck, and the actions which again got us back to what we wanted. The second thing which happened was the material was being brought on the sea by the sea, and the transporter declared bankruptcy, and there was a huge delay there. And the moment that happened, the system again projected that the project is going out, and immediate action was taken. So the strategy was changed. Instead of assembling all 16 pieces and loading them together, it was divided. We'll do it in 2 batches of 8 and recover the delay. Again, there were hundreds of supplies. Unfortunately, one piece of supply for the last 3 modules was missed, and it was discovered very late. So the entire process of ordering, etc., happened, and that meant that we are going to get delayed by again a big margin of around 4 months. This happened quite late in the game, so that is where we could not recover the entire delay, and we had to counter it by changing the strategy of commissioning. So what it meant was we knew that we won't be ready with the entire platform. So the management decided we are going to go ahead and commission 12 of the platforms. And once the commissioning is done, we are able to see the risk which we faced. We would make the last 4 pieces ready and lower them after that. So we will do the commissioning, discover all the risks here, solve of the teething troubles that we face, and then do the rest of the piece quite quickly. So this is how. So the point is, we did not, as I said, we were looking at this big picture. We were looking at the focus and finish task, which is at a pretty high level, and we were not trying to manage the details. And yet, we were able to control the outcome of the project by just doing this. So some of the key things which are required, one is the plan itself, and as you saw, it's a pretty simple plan. It's not a 40,000 line plan, it was a 200 line plan. So that's pretty easy to look at, and it's a simple strategy. But the major change is plans and schedules are typically delegated to a lower level. Top and senior management do not consider those to be a very important function that they should be involved in. So that was changed. Typically, what people do is when they talk about top management talks about a plan, they talk about major dates, or they talk about cash flow targets. It took a while to make them realize that a plan is not some dates or some values. It's a strategy, and that means it's a network. And that network, if we can build it and mitigate the risks that we envisage in the project, it's a pretty stable and reliable network. So over the course of 28 months, in spite of all these things happening, as I showed, the strategy only changed twice during 28 months. So if you think of rebaselining, replanning, etc., only twice. It's a very stable network. And once you create that strategy, then that becomes the single version of truth, sort of, to align all the stakeholders who are involved in the project. And as I said, we don't ignore the detailed scheduling, but the schedules, normally what happens is people create detailed schedules below, and then there are summary tasks through which people try to manage projects. Here it happens just the opposite way. It's a top-down approach. So the strategy is created first, and detailed schedules are simply outcomes of the strategy. So if the strategy, something gets delayed, the schedule moves with it. If something happens early, the schedule comes in with it. So the schedules become subordinated to this plan. And the second piece, which was important, was the reliability of the visibility it provides. Because it's very stable, it's a reliable network. Any projection on the basis of this is also pretty reliable. And the only rule that changes, as I said before, the future projections, bad news very quickly is pretty good for taking actions quickly. And it is not to be used for getting angry or starting to blame people. Because if that is the case, then people are very, very defensive about a system showing delays. And the third important piece was, we did not try to manage the micro schedules. As I said, in a project of this magnitude, of so many details, lots and lots of delays happen on a day-to-day basis. And the modus operandi is not trying to solve each and every problem that happens, because they are unavoidable. But manage the plan at this level out of all those problems. So this plan is sort of a filtering mechanism. Out of the hundreds of problems happening every day, only a couple actually affect the plan at this level, and those are the ones we attack and solve. So this was sort of the case study I wanted to illustrate to introduce this principle.
That was really fantastic and kind of mind-blowing. But if you don't mind, I have a lot of questions for you as I was listening to you, and I will also go through the audience questions. So first of all, what you've showed us, which was kind of a top-down approach, and coming up with the high-level schedule to be able to manage the details. So that's what we usually do, is completely opposite. As you know, in projects, we come up with the detail and the roll-up shows the high level. So, but how is it possible when you saw, like, on that focus task or bar that you showed, that you put all of your focus on finishing that and making sure that's finished and then moving on to the next batch? So how do you know the issues, where they are driving that? Because if you don't have much details on it, and if you're looking, I understand the importance of the high level view of the schedule, but how do you know what's driving the delays if you are not looking at the details? So first of all, if you can open up that for us, because you're completely switching our perspective in terms of how we can do planning by top-down approach and just looking at the big strategy and how we can move things around and then go to the details. But are you rebuilding the whole schedule with this new strategy by high level and then details, or how do you know where the issues are coming from? If you just elaborate more on that, that would be great.
So there's this third point, which is what I'll do is, probably I have to take you through a few more slides to explain this concept outside the case study, so that I can probably give you the answer as to how does this high level strategy, if I understand it correctly, what you're asking is, how does this high level strategy interact with the details which are below, because the work is happening at the detail level.
Exactly, that's the question. Yes,
that's where those delays are coming from. So how are we incorporating them inside this plan? So what I will do is, I'll take you through very quickly through a thought experiment. as to what is the meaning of this focus and finish plan, and whether we are ignoring details or whether we are looking at the details in a different way. This again, I'm not sticking to the case study only right now. This is for any project, may it be a capex project or a software project or any project. What this picture is denoting is there's some blue work here, some golden work here, and some pink work here, and there are three people each, which sort of tells you the resources that is required to get this work done. And this 1W means 1 week, so it's 5 weeks of blue, then 7 weeks of golden, and 4 weeks of pink. And this efficiency of 0.8 on top means that probably you could do this work with less resources in 5 weeks, but it is sort of more resources required, more resources than optimally required is available for doing this job. Does the picture make sense? And if I have to just quickly give an example, if it's a so just to make sure, in a real life project there are many more steps, but I'm just for purpose of simplification, I'm describing this blue as some detailed engineering work, then the golden as civil works, which can only happen when all this detailed engineering is done, and finally some installation and commissioning works, which will follow the civil works. Obviously, there's a lot of other scope. There are technical specifications, there's placement of orders, the delivery of equipment. I'm deliberately not using them to keep the example simple. If you think of a very different type of a project like a software, then you can think of this as the design phase. You can think of the golden as the development phase. You can think of the pink as the testing phase. So any project that you take, there are different stakeholders and the work flows through them. Only then the project can run to completion. So I hope this picture will make sense to the audience. Now, as I said, the problem in projects is we never have enough resources, and we always operate in a scenario like this, where we do not have just one stream of work to be completed, but we have multiple streams. And if it was an ideal world, if we had unlimited resources, then this wouldn't have been a problem. But it's not an ideal world, and we end up with more resources, less resources than what would be ideally required to support all work streams. Right? So ideally, we should have had 9 of the blue, 9 of the golden, and 9 of the pink. Unfortunately, we have 3 different work streams and only have 3 each. So we have 1/3 of what we need. Now, what will we do when we reach a situation like this? And obviously, if we are looking at all the work, it's all of equal length, and all the start dates are today, then the most obvious thing to do would be to distribute whatever we have to make sure the starts are not delayed. Because the fear is, if we don't start today, then we are going to get delayed due to some reason or the other. And because there were more resources for one work stream to start with, ideally when we spread the resources, each 1 week task should be taking 3 weeks. But let's assume that we are optimizing our resource utilization, and instead of 2 weeks additional, it's just taking 1.5 weeks extra. So if we just do the arithmetic, this would take around 40 weeks to complete. So if we do not have enough resources, obviously the project is going to take longer. But when we spread the resources, it takes around 40 weeks, right? So if you have any doubts, please ask me. I would really like to explain this well. So if this is the situation, then, and remember, except for the shortage of resources, there are no more uncertainties in this picture. So let's add some uncertainties. Let's assume that apart from the resource shortage, other things are also going to hit us. So these signs denote randomly uncertainties hitting us in different parts of the project. So let's assume that the worth of every uncertainty is another week on top of whatever is the duration. So that gets us a little more late, right? And now let's assume that we have the best technology available. So the moment this uncertainty hits and there's an increase in duration, management gets to know, and they're very alert, and they can act on every problem that happens in the project. And so obviously they will take some actions to recover the delay. And as you can see, this one, there's no action. So for every uncertainty that's hit, there's an action with some reaction time which management is going to take. But for this one, because it's coming too late in the game, it's not possible to take any action. So let's hope that management can take all these actions, can recover some time, and this is the best that can happen. So we can, by reacting, if uncertainties come on top of the shortage of resources, and we get the right signals, the management will take a lot of actions, and we will get the project back to some extent. So this is the best case outcome that can happen. If I look back at this project in hindsight, I would say, okay, I took a lot of actions here and here and reduced it by 2 weeks. But unfortunately, this came back by only 1 week. So finally, the worth of all these actions was just 1 week. And you could have spent less money, because even if you did not take two of these actions, it wouldn't have affected my end outcome anyway. So this is how traditionally projects are managed. Now, what we are changing in this is we are going back to the drawing board and saying, okay, asking the question, okay, can this be done in a better way? And in order to do it in a better way, we are changing the definition just a little bit. So we are no more looking at the project in terms of the detailed scope of work. We have simply batched them into these boxes, and instead of around 48 different tasks, we are now looking at only 9 tasks in the project. So you can call them super tasks. They're nothing but combination of those details. Uh, does this make sense? This is exactly the same picture as before, right? And another rule change that we are making, which is something I mentioned before, we are not bothered about the start dates anymore. All we want to do now, we are saying the only thing that we want to do is focus and finish. Whatever box you start, let's try and make sure this 5 weeks is done, or if possible, with the extra resources, let's try to do it faster. That's the only logic we have. And if we take that logic, then obviously we cannot start all three together, because if we start all three together, it would take more than 5 weeks. So we are now forced to work this way. And very surprisingly, instead of doing things in parallel, if we work in this way, instead of the 40 weeks, with all the productivity improvement we saw, here we are assuming no improvement in productivity. The resources are still more than what is required. Some of them might be sitting even idle. So even if they're sitting idle, we are not trying to start anything more. We are just focused on closing this as fast as possible. Even if we work that way, this provides a much, much better answer. It's 10 weeks faster than what was happening previously. And this is not just the end. So this is the amount of improvement we typically get in projects, which is in the range of 20 to 30%. This is not the end. Now, if you look at this task now, you can see that this blue task there are some gaps been created in between them. So that it's like we are creating cushions out of thin air. And if I just change the way we look at it, I'm going to just change the way we look at it. If I just rearrange it and look at it like a network, we see that there's one very clear critical path. Unlike the previous case where everything was critical, now we have a very clear critical path. And all the other sequences have a lot of cushions now. These fitting buffers have appeared out of nowhere. And what this allows us to do is, even if we are hit by the exactly same uncertainties as before, as I said, at this level, the plan acts as a filtering mechanism. So all those uncertainties are absorbed, and only one of them is affecting the end date of the project. So instead of all the 5 actions that we saw before, now the 4 actions are not even required. They have got absorbed inside the buffers which were generated, and there's only one action required. And that's why the actions are more leveraging. Even in the case study, it's not like the delays were not happening. It were happening everywhere, but they were getting absorbed in the buffers. Only the ones which really affected the project was visible. Now, your question was, just to quickly come back to your question, that, okay, you're looking at this at a very high level. Where are the details? How are you figuring this out? So this is where the 2-tier approach comes in. So the network that we create, it has 2 layers. So you see, this is the driving layer. Unlike the bottom-up approach, where the detailed layer is actually the network, the higher level is the summary of the network. In this case, it's just the opposite. The higher level is the network, and the details are just following the boxes, which means if the 7 weeks task, it becomes 9, all the subsequents will move away and will take the detailed schedules along with them. And if this gets done in 5 weeks, all the subsequent tasks would move in and would bring all the detailed schedules along with it. So work is happening at this level. If there's a delay, we have a system which figures out the impact of the delay on the entire scope and then rolls it up and tells you whether the plan above is getting affected or not. So this is the mechanism. So the details are there. The details are there in folds, you can say. The work gets done in the details. The system figures out the relationship between the details and the impact on the top. If there is no impact, the 7 weeks will not change. And the delays, whatever happened, will get absorbed. If there is an impact, then it will show up here. If there is some fitting buffer, it will get absorbed. If there is no fitting buffer, like this is the critical path of the network, then it will show up in the projection. And then you know where you have to take actions.
That's quite interesting. So you're saying that we are doing at a high level strategic planning, and then whatever the strategy we are changing at a high level, the system automatically recognizes the impact on the detail level. Is it kind of an AI type planning that the system recognizes the impact, or it's a manual process to know what details would be impacted by the overall strategy that you're changing?
Right. So that's a great question. Now, the point is this high level plan is pretty simple. So you can create it on a whiteboard. You don't need a system to do that. But the problem is with the details. This method of making sure the details belong to the right boxes is the tricky part. And it has been tried manually. It is still done manually in some places. It just means that you need to teach a lot of people to maintain this discipline. So it's not impossible to do it manually, but it takes a lot of effort to implement it. The software really helps in automating this entire process. So there's I can show you the software very quickly. I don't know how much time we have, but the purpose of the software is to take this high level plan and sort of making the brain of the system. And these details are, there is no need now because there is a plan at the high level which is driving the entire project. There is no need now to put in all the details in one go as well. So one practical problem with every project is that you do not know exactly what details are going to emerge for something that is going to happen 6 months down the line. So that's why you can do a rolling wave detailing in this case. You can have the main plan and you can detail out whatever you know, which is coming up maybe in the next 1 or 2 months. So you can keep putting those details in the system, and the system then knows. It also has an integrated progress reporting system. So people can just report work from site. Okay, I have done this and this is completed, or I have done so much cubic meter of concreting today, or I have done so much kg of welding today. And from that progress report, the system is able to figure out what is the speed of work in the details. And from that, it's able to intelligently roll it up and figure out what is the impact on this high level task. And then it's able to look at the entire network, and from each of the impacts is able to figure out what is getting absorbed and what is not getting absorbed, and show you the signals. So it is, details are very, very important in the project for generating the schedules as well as for figuring out the impact on the strategy itself.
Yeah, that's really innovative approach, really, to look at the plan at a high level, come up with strategies on what working. I love the fact that you said the critical path is in that high level plan. So that's really what you're focusing your attention, putting the focus, finish that, and then move to the next bucket. And another thing I really liked about was the way that you manage the resources without overloading the resources and doing things in parallel. You still could do things in sequence costs and still achieve the same results, which still I'm trying to digest how things work. But I assume a lot of that would go back to the software, the innovative software that you are using. So I assume we cannot do this with the casual Primavera P6 or the scheduling tool that we are working on. So which I'm going to, this is my next question for you. But before I go there, I have several questions from the audience, if you don't mind asking, and then we go through the details of the program. So Mohammed is asking, is it the planning method that worked or the execution methodologies that worked for you in the sample project that you showed us?
They are not really separate. I would say that if you don't think of the project in this way, then in execution you won't get the same signals. The signals will sort of have to be derived the way it is done today. So the planning really sets it up for execution. And once, as I said, this plan is like the brain of the entire project. So once the brain is in place, you add the details and it is able to figure out what is happening to your project. So they sort of go hand in hand. You cannot separate one from the other.
Fantastic. And yeah, and actually that's the beauty of this, that you're kind of combining the execution strategy with your plan. So another question we have is from Rob, and he's asking, what were the contingencies in place to help maintain the schedule progress?
Is there some more detail to the question? So
yeah, so Rob, if you just elaborate more on your question in regards to contingencies and schedule progress, that would be great, so we can better answer you. So another question is on the cost. So I'm not sure whether you also integrated the cost with the schedule or not, but Shaminder is asking this question: what about the actual cost versus the budgeted as you brought in new execution strategy?
Okay, so in the new execution strategy, if we go back, so the basic idea is to not increase the cost in any way, to use whatever is available. As I tried to explain, we are not changing anything. We are just rearranging the way the work is being visualized. We are not saying that. So just to go back to the case study, the major actions were the major actions that I described were doing piling from both ends. That involved doing some marine piling, but it was a shipyard being built, so the marine rig was already there, so we did not spend extra money to get them working for us. It was already there in the system. It was doing some other work. We made sure some of the capacity is allocated to us, so we did not increase the cost. In terms of increasing the rates, all we did was, instead of doing it in 16 pieces, we said we will give you the entire work front and you can do it in one go. So that doesn't increase the cost in any way. You anyway had to lower. In fact, it reduces the cost because you would keep your lifting equipments for longer, doing it piece by piece. Instead, you're just doing it in one go. So it takes shorter time and it reduces cost. On increasing the productivity, sorry, the speed of execution in case of the 60 hoists we were building, it required identifying. So the vendor had around 7 subcontractors already identified. We only persuaded them to find out 2 more and add 9 so that we could take more work at the same time. But the total amount of work did not increase. It's just that each of those subcontractors got less amount of work, so that did not increase the cost. So there is no way we are suggesting that you do this by increasing cost. But cost decisions sometimes come up if the risk is too high and the opportunity loss is too high. Then it might be required in some cases to take a cost decision, and the trade-off is very simple. If you think the risk is too high, if I don't take the cost decision, then the loss due to the delay, you can do a trade-off and you can decide whether you want to spend that extra money or not. So,
Fantastic. Thanks for explaining. So, how about the software? I'm really curious to know more about this smart planning software or project control software that you're using to make this possible. Like, imagine like being able to do this strategic planning and without going into the details. So, it saves a lot of time on our end and makes things more efficient. So, and you're really changing the traditional way of thinking when it comes to planning scheduling. So,
let
would you
me
mind
quickly
sharing more insights in regards to software that we can use in applying the focus to finish strategy?
I'll kind of give you a quick glimpse of how it works very quickly. So, uh, this is sort of the software's dashboard where there's a list of projects, and I'll quickly show what I mean by the strategic plan. So, I'll take this one distillation project, and this is sort of the view of the strategy. And if you look at the strategy, the strategy also has dependencies, etc. And these are the super tasks which were decided in the beginning. And if I just quickly give you a glimpse of how the plan looked like when we started, it looked like this. So the work streams, if you remember the way I tried to represent it, this was the original uh, way the plan was created. And what is being shown now by the system is the projection on the plan. Sort of saying once we discovered that the rate of civil works is slow, then the system starts projecting the impact, and it pushes out the rest of the plan beyond the due date and gives you a root shock saying that in the future this is where your plan going to end up. And when we talked about the details, if you see there's a plus sign, so if you go inside, you can have a more detailed schedule inside, but it is inside the bar on top. So it is not a schedule on its own, it belongs inside the bar.